I suppose it's time to tell you it was inside the magical space pussy. You can believe me or not, what do I care? I'm the guy who's been inside the magical space pussy. My life has been pretty much downhill since then. I mean, fuck, Neil Armstrong. What did he see? A bunch of gray rocks? Big fucking deal. I saw a cooch growing out of the side of a canyon. Top that, NASA. You tang-drinking cocksuckers. Anyways, where was I? Yeah, Uncle Adolf. So I was living in Death Valley, hanging out with the Manson family, and Charlie kept mentioning this guy, Uncle Adolf, and I figured he's talking about Hitler because he's sort of into this white supremacy thing. But then I started realizing that he's talking about a guy who's still alive. And then one day the guy showed up. They asked me to come over to their cabin, and this old guy was sitting there. White hair, deep tan, lined face, pale eyes. He introduced himself as Adolf, and he's got a German accent. He made no secret of the fact that he was an ex-Nazi. This made me nervous. That's kind of something you keep under your hat. He said he had found Charlie at Berkeley, that Charlie was perfect for my purpose. And I asked what his purpose was, and he said, testing. I kind of shrugged because I didn't really give a shit about his little coy answer. And I got up to leave when this mongoloid motherfucker they called Clem punched me straight in the face. Suddenly I was on my ass. There were a couple girls there too, and they jumped on me and held me down and tied my hands behind my back. If I had known what they had done to Sharon Tate, I would have been unspeakably terrified. But as it was, I was merely really scared. They tossed me into the back of the dune buggy and drove out into the desert. It was midday, and the sky was just one giant glare. We drove for over an hour, and eventually they got me out and hauled me down into this deep sandy arroyo, and they started marching me down it. They had put wooden stakes into the ground at various points, and when we came to them, they seemed to be really careful to always stay in between the stakes. Later they had chains tied between the stakes, and we all had to go under the chains like some kind of obstacle course. I didn't know what to make of it. I had a lot to process at the time. I started to notice that the rock walls of the arroyo were abnormal. There were strange striations through the rock and what looked like the cross-sections of giant insect tunnels. I'd never seen rocks like that. The whole thing was just very alien. And then I started to hear the screaming. Up ahead I could hear people's voices, thousands of voices, all of them screaming and howling at once. Slowly, incredibly, the screaming changed into a kind of laughter, an insane laughter, giggles and chuckles and titters. I wondered if it was in my head, if I was so scared that my mind had cracked, or if they had dosed me with LSD or something. Finally, we went around a bend in the arroyo, and, well, there it was. They said it would be a pussy, and I guess it kind of looked like one. Maybe after some kind of drastic dildo mishap. It was just flesh. Wrinkled, lobed, flabby flesh, growing out of the rock like mold or something. It had hair and pores and freckles. Some of it was pale, some of it was black. It was taller than me, and in the center there was an opening, pink and wet, like a pussy. And the Kraut told me he wanted to see its level of development. He took a revolver from one of the girls and pointed it at my face and told me to walk inside. It was either get shot or go into the big mangled pussy. It was honestly a tough choice. There was something completely fucked up, completely not right about that thing. Something in my bones told me not to go into it, not to go near it, to just take the bullet in the head. But I figured maybe I could go in just a little bit, and then wait for them to leave and get the hell out of there. Not a great plan, but the best I could come up with. So I went in. The entrance was just barely wide enough to slip into. All I could see was glistening pink flesh ahead. There was this sound like laughter, and then screaming, and then laughter that was coming from deep inside. The walls were blood-warm on my shoulders, and the smell was, well, what you might expect. Not great. Let's just say it was not great. I pushed forward, and the walls kind of gave way, and found myself moving through this slimy, suffocating flesh, and I'm starting to panic because my hands are still tied behind my back. And I'm feeling like I'm about to choke on this stuff, and the walls are moving, like pulsating. I feel like I'm being digested. And then suddenly, I'm pushed through into this kind of chamber. Talk about out of the frying pan and into the fire. The chamber was just a nightmare. I mean, I've just never seen that. It was unholy. There were faces and heads and legs all kind of fused together. The walls were just all these crawling limbs and these terrified faces and fusions of teeth and cheeks and hair and fingers coming out of knees and all those people. Were they still people? Had they ever been people? Had they been made a part of that thing? I started to scream. Everything around me was screaming. All the mouths on the walls were screaming, and I was screaming too. And then I was laughing, and I felt hands and mouths all over my body, and they were tickling me, touching me all over. And then I was screaming again. I had to get out of there. I had to get out of the nightmare. I started pushing back towards the entrance, but the hands were all over me. I felt something bite into my hip. A mouth was biting me. I screamed at the sharp pain and moved away from it. I started to think that maybe I could get one of the mouths to bite through my ropes, and then I would at least have my hands free. I struggled to turn around and move the ropes toward the mouth, but just when I got it in position, the mouth bit right into my finger instead. The pain was incredible, but I was giggling, just laughing and laughing. The mouth pulled the flesh from my finger like it was a chicken wing. Another mouth bit into my shoulder. I was chuckling away at this point. The hands were grabbing me, pulling on me, pulling me apart, tearing my arms right out of their sockets. Fingers were digging in between my ribs. I was slathered with blood and screaming as the fingers dug into my eyes. Well, I guess at this point you're probably wondering how I, your intrepid narrator, managed to escape the bottomless pit. How I managed to survive to tell you this tale. I simply didn't. I never escaped the bottomless pit. I am the bottomless pit. I am the tree of life. The North Korean situation. The North Korean situation 1980s was unique, as most North Korean situations are. They built something we haven't seen before or since, an independent flesh interface of enormous size and power, but within a contained incident zone and no metallic cylinders. We detected it via the cosmic ray information signature, which was concentrated on a secure, shielded facility outside the Hwasong prison camp. This was a huge underground facility which they had been constructing for over a decade. We anticipated that they would construct a portal-level interface and were fully prepared to bomb it before it became uncontained. What we didn't expect is that it would achieve level 7 cosmic transmission rates without all the other normal signs of a full-fledged portal. We considered bombing it anyways, or using our Brilliant Pebbles kinetic orbital strike system, but instead we managed to get 2 agents into the facility to take a look at it. They achieved high-level security clearance and found that the Koreans were using the Flesh interface as an information processing facility. This was quite novel, as we had always considered it to be a potential weapons system. Our curiosity was truly piqued. Clearly the Norks knew something we didn't. Unfortunately, our agents weren't able to access the enormous mainframe chamber which actually housed the interface. All they knew was that it was in a huge chamber full of temperature-regulated water. We instructed them to breach the chamber and get a look at it, then send us the data by satellite. We knew full well that it would probably cost them their lives, but we pumped them up with a lot of do-it-for-the-planet rhetoric. So one night they put on dive suits and went into the chamber. It was basically like a huge lake contained within a massive darkened steel box. Imagine a flooded warehouse with endless rows of dim ceiling lights shining down on rippling black water. They jumped into the water, and pretty quickly they picked up some pretty interesting audio signals with varying frequencies. A kind of squeaking, mewling sound. They recognized the sound for what it was right away, but had a hard time believing it. Whale songs. The chamber contained several adult humpback whales. How do I explain Mother? How do I explain Mother? What was she? Great Babylon, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. I used to lie in my bed, the blinds pulled against the summer sunlight, listening to the sounds of other kids playing outside. I lay there for hours, not sleeping, wondering who had made Mother. She was made from all different sorts of animal parts. One of her feet was a big heavy hoof. The other was a tiny little kitty cat paw. I could hear her clumping around downstairs. Her smell, the smell of cigarettes and disease, was everywhere in the house, pooling in the darkness. Slowly, night would come, and I would imagine floating out of my window, floating up into the deep starry blue, looking down at all the houses shrinking into tiny boxes, the clean breeze blowing on my face. How I would cry in my little bed. I was very young when Mother first came. I had another mommy before her, a good one, who wore pearls and had a voice like music. Then one day I got sick, a fever. I was crying all day and it went on for weeks. I guess my first mommy couldn't take it anymore. One night she left forever. When I came down for breakfast the next morning, this new thing was waiting for me in the kitchen. At least, I think that's what happened. Mother never talked. She just snorted and made hoarse sounds. Awful. Her parts were sewn together with yarn, and there were patches of wet burlap. I didn't see her eyes until she had been there almost a year. Have you ever seen horse eyes up close? They're like goat's eyes. They have a sideways pupil. I would come home after school and there would be kids sitting at the breakfast table. She gave them medicine so they did whatever she wanted them to. It made them just sit there, staring and shaking. Then she would take them down in the basement and make them into things. She tried to make me do it too, but I didn't want to. I realized she was afraid of the Bible. I realized it had power, blood power. When I read it to her, her different pieces would shudder and pull apart, and she would howl like a wolf, and blood would run from her segments. The Bible brought transmissions from the cross that floated in the red summer sky. Everything in time is arranged around the epicenter wherein the nail drove into Christ's hand. Lines of possibilities radiate outward from it. Kingdoms rise and fall, men grow and die like flowers in a field. The beast that you saw was, and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. Breached the underwater chamber. So 2 of our agents had breached the underwater chamber containing the North Korean flesh interface, and found nothing but several humpback whales. Now this was a head-scratcher. We knew it was a flesh interface because it was receiving information-rich rays coming from outer space, yet how could it be taking the form of humpback whales? All previous interfaces had taken on a decidedly less conventional form. Well, then our agents decided to get a closer look. There were 3 whales, 2 adults and a calf. They appeared normal in every respect, though it was difficult to get a close look at them. They seemed to be in quite a bit of distress, though the agents were not biologists and had a limited understanding of what whale distress looks like. The agents noticed some very loud, low-frequency percussive sounds coming from the bottom of the chamber, which was entirely hidden in darkness. So they headed towards the bottom, a distance of several stories. There they shined their lights around and made a fairly alarming discovery. Bones. Enormous curving rib bones and jaw bones and vertebrae. They were apparently whale bones. They also noticed a large circular gate on the floor of the chamber, which was closed at the time. At this point, one of the agents began to panic. He had come to the conclusion that the whales were not the interface itself, but were merely food for the interface, which was perhaps being held in another chamber below this one. There were some problems with this theory. Why use whales, a fairly rare and very difficult animal to corral, when they could just use a large amount of smaller fish? Well, it's all just speculation. The agents quickly swam out of the chamber and never found out what was behind the gate, if anything. Later, they gave us some very valuable information on the facility's information processing capabilities, which were staggering and quite appalling to imagine in the hands of a regime such as the DPRK. Since there was no incident zone and segmentation wasn't an issue, we were able to solve the problem quite neatly by releasing a nerve agent into the water chamber. The cosmic ray download stopped shortly thereafter, indicating success, though it did result in the loss of both agents and a major loss of life at the facility overall. Anyways, that was our first encounter with an MBIS, Massive Biological Information System, and a near encounter with what we would later come to call a skin ship. Its destruction has allowed for the continued validity of prime number-based encryption systems, though some of the secrets uncovered by the DPRK during that time have forced us into the unpleasant position of supporting the regime. Blackmail, basically. I dreamt I was a dog. Last night I dreamt I was a dog. I lived on a small family farm somewhere on the American frontier, back in the time of plow mules and butter churns. It was one of those long dreams that feels like an entire lifetime. I remember the end of the dream with an awful clarity, but the beginning seems like something that happened many years ago. The first images are vivid but disjointed. I recall the shape of my master walking against the sunlight overhead, the smell of his leather boots, the shadows at the edge of the forest, a little pig-tailed girl hugging me, fresh mud in the spring, warm floorboards in the winter. Everything had a peaceful storybook quality to it, except one thing. Sometimes late at night I heard singing. It came from outside, out there in the far distance, from somewhere in the deep forest beyond the boundaries of my world. Some nights it was one voice, but usually it was many, singing a strange, aching song. It sounded like a haunted crying. When I was little I had whimpered and cried like this to my mother. But who was crying out there in the night? What kind of dark mother was listening? When I first heard the singing, I was filled with a blood dread. The hair on my back bristled, and I growled and barked at the darkness. Even after the night finally went silent, I trotted around for hours in vigilant anger. Later, as I heard it more often, I learned to accept it with a sullen unease. Of course, this singing was the sound of wolves howling, but I didn't know this in the dream. In the dream, I'd never seen a wolf in my life. One winter I began to see them prowling in the woods. To me they were ghost dogs, shadows sneaking between trees, eyes glinting in the twilight. I growled and barked at them, but didn't pursue. For several months they never encroached on my world. They finally came on a late winter's evening. The sun had sunk into an orange glow beyond the edge of the world. The family was in the cabin, and I was out trotting through the snow, anxious to get back to them, because I knew food would be coming soon. Then atop a small hill by the apple tree, an apparition. My body snapped to attention, and I growled, the hairs on my back standing on end. It was a wolf, just a stone's throw from me, its silvery coat half lit in the dying light of day. It came toward me in a sleek, soundless jaunt. I barked and snapped at the air. It slowed and stopped just beyond my lunging distance. Now, crazed with fear and anger, I saw that it was a large female, healthy, well-fed, with a gorgeous coat. Misty gray, the color of snow seen at a winter's distance. Its smell was alien, confusing, but laced with a clear and potent confidence, a supreme assuredness. Indeed, it did not seem to be afraid of me at all, nor did it threaten. Its mouth hung slack, and steam issued from its muzzle in steady, happy puffs. This calmed me for a moment, and in the next moment redoubled my anger. I growled from the deepest, most murderous part of my dog self. It spoke to me. Its mouth didn't move, and there was no sound, but by the logic of the dream, it spoke to me in a clear, dignified voice. "Hello, child." I snarled at it. It took another step forward, and its eyes caught the last of the sunlight, glowing in a fantastic array of yellows. Those eyes, rimmed in jet black like mascara, projected a powerful allure, an otherworldly glamour. "You bark and snarl, but look at my face. Am I not of your kind?" it asked. I could not answer. I could only growl softly. "Is my face not like your mother's? Do you remember her?" The sudden scent of distant memory came to me, and I felt a pang of loneliness. I had not seen my mother or any other dog since I was small. Since I had come to the farm, my only family had been the people I lived with, and a few of the more tolerant pigs. I searched now for dim, fragrant memories of my mother. I felt her huge, bristled muzzle licking at my face. I saw her giant sweeping legs as I followed them through high fields. She had seemed taller than a horse then. I remembered the softness of her teats, feeding from them with my brothers and sisters. What had become of my family? I had spent every day with them, and then one day, all gone. The wolf paced back and forth now, keeping a small distance from me, its eyes ranging over the farm. Again I saw some strange haunting glamour in them, something that glittered with secret distant power. "The people in that house, they're not your family. We are. We share ancient blood," it said, its voice deep and resounding with the rhythm of wisdom. My master had a voice like this, but it didn't have the total authority of this alpha female's. I saw with alarm two dark shapes come over the hill by the apple tree. More wolves, moving silent with heads lowered. I barked at them. "You hate us and love them. But do they love you? What are you to them? Aren't you the lowest of the low? Always getting the last of the food, the smallest scraps? Imagine living differently. Imagine taking your own food, killing, drinking lifeblood, being master over others." The two other wolves slunk down the hill. The skin on my back tightened again, but the strange hypnotic power of the alpha wolf held me still. "You could leave this house and come with us. We range the forests. We've seen rivers wider than this whole valley, mountains that go up into the clouds, lakes with no end but the end of the world, places with no houses or men at all. You could come with us. We could be your brothers and sisters." The other two wolves came closer. They were unmistakably females, both young and well-muscled. Their confidence was not as absolute as the alpha wolves, but they showed no fear as they came to me. I smelled on them a strange longing, a deep winter's desire for warmth. The alpha wolf stepped closer, close enough that her steaming breath tickled my nose. Her eyes danced with cold, burning light, and she spoke in a voice that made my blood hum. "Outside your life waits everything you've never known," she said. "There are worlds, child. There are ecstasies." I then recognized the allure that lit her eyes, the unspeakable longing that glimmered in their depths. It had seemed this whole time to be some fantastic alien desire, reaching out to me from a distant world. Perhaps it truly was. But more simply than this, it was hunger, plain hunger. That ancient, unsleeping hunger, older than the first furred thing that even gave rise to the races of dogs and wolves and men. Hunger had brought this wolf across rivers and mountains and endless frozen plains to meet me in that moment. I can still see her face, the final image of the dream, before the other wolves tore into me and I died and I awoke. Her face with eyes that spoke of open loneliness. Her face so noble and gentle and motherly. Her face as beautiful and ancient as the stars.